the author of the complaint a political hack. In a private meeting with US diplomats at the UN, he made a chilling reference to how he thinks they should be handled.
I want to know who's the person who gave the whistleblower? Who's the person who gave the whistleblower the information? Because that's close to a spy. You know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right? The spies and tracing. We used to handle it a little differently than we do now.
Welcome to the Politicrat. I am Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, December the 2nd, 2020. On this episode of the Politicrat, a look at violence in America in the political realm as aided and supported not only by Donald Trump, but by an entire system in the United States of America. The heart of the system itself. And the news media, the corporate news media's failure, deliberate or otherwise, to look squarely at the historical overview and the system itself. That coming up next.
Good afternoon. The Prime Minister has urged everyone in the country to have a COVID-19 jab after the UK became the first in the world to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Regulators gave the green light this morning and rollout will begin as early as next week.
I know that the whole House will want to join me in welcoming the fantastic news that the MHRA has formally authorised the Pfizer vaccine for COVID-19. The vaccine will begin to be made available across the UK from next week. I would like to pay tribute to and to thank all those who have made this possible. It is the protection of vaccines that will ultimately allow us to reclaim our lives and get our economy moving again. I strongly urge people to take up the vaccine, but it is no part of our culture or our ambition in this country to make vaccines mandatory. That's not how we do things.
Well, studies show the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is up to 95% effective and works across all age groups. The UK has ordered 40 million doses of it already, which is enough to vaccinate 20 million people because 2 doses are needed. Around 10 million doses are expected to be available to roll out in the coming weeks, with 800,000 doses available from next week for priority groups. The challenge is going to be how to distribute and store it, as this is the vaccine which needs to be kept at between minus 70 and minus 80 degrees. However, it does remain stable for a limited time between 2 and 8 degrees, allowing for it to be taken to distribution centres.
Welcome back. So I do want to say that we have news from the United Kingdom, as you may have just heard there, that they have become the first country, my native country, the first in the world to announce that they have a vaccine that is ready for public use and that it will be delivered this weekend and people will start to get the vaccine early next week. That is a tremendous bit of news. That is really good news. I should add, though, that even though that will be happening, there are always reasons to be cautious about this information, only because it does seem remarkably quick that Pfizer did this, Pfizer and BioNTech. So I do want to add that caveat. While the news is great that there is a vaccine that's going to be available as soon as next week in the UK, I do want to add that Pfizer has not yet released to the public the information and data around its trials and all the details therein. And the fact that that has not yet been done is, to me, somewhat a red flag. Now, earlier this week, you heard Professor Dorit Rice talking about vaccines, talking about the concerns that she had about emergency use or emergency use authorization in the U.S. It does feel rushed. This whole thing, that I hate to pour cold water on it, but it does seem rushed. And I am hoping that all goes well with the administering of the vaccine. It's going to be a logistical challenge for sure. And whether there are going to be costs to it or not, in the NHS, I would imagine that there wouldn't be. I should double check that. But, there's always politics and economics and everything. It is well known. So while I am very pleased about this news, and I hope that everything goes well, I do want to offer a little bit of concern regarding the fact that it was so quick. And I just hope that the U.S. resists the urge to try to want to do the same here. Moderna had apparently applied for the emergency use, well, they did earlier this week. They applied for emergency use authorization back on Monday, which is when I had the conversation with Professor Rice. So I am hoping that I'm very much hoping that the U.S. still takes the level of care and deliberation and proper testing and trials and everything else around the vaccine, because this should not be rushed. We cannot afford that in a pandemic. But we'll see what happens in the UK, and of course, we'll have some follow-up conversations about it as well over the next few weeks and months, and look forward to following this up some more and getting into a deeper dive on some of these issues. I mean, I had certainly expressed that to Professor Rice, that I do look forward to a deeper dive into some of these issues that we touched upon in our conversation earlier this week. In a future appearance, it would be really good to explore some of these issues that are very, very important to communities that are going to be, I shouldn't say implicated, but are going to be at the heart of this because of the rates of infection of this coronavirus in those communities: Black communities, Native American communities, Latinx communities. So all of that is to come. I want to point out that the focus of the conversation, today's episode, the topic, is about this history that we have here in the United States of political violence, of violent language being used against politicians, and of course against Black people as well, who are politicians or who may not be politicians. There was a threat made against a former government official, Chris Krebs, who had stepped down from his post, or rather was fired by Donald Trump a week or two ago. Chris Krebs is a white 40-something-year-old, 43-year-old Republican, male, and was the head of the Cyber Intelligence Security Agency, which is one of the agencies in government that deals with stopping cyber threats, cyber attacks rather, and dealing with all of those things. And this was something that was very, very, as that siren just wails on here, this is something that was really critical for the elections. He had talked about the election being 100%, been the most secure election ever and all of that. I mean, I don't want to go through all of that again, but this was the tenor of this, and a threat was made against his life, literally, on television or on the radio. So this is the lead-in to what I'm about to play for you, which was yesterday's episode of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. It's roughly maybe close to 10 minutes and change, maybe 10 minutes. And what you're going to hear is Chris Hayes. You'll hear from him. You'll hear the conversation, or you'll hear Gabriel Sterling, who is a Georgia elections official that deals with the elections and voter supervision and things of that nature in Georgia. And then you will hear from Michelle Goldberg, who is a journalist and opinionator, commentator. She writes in the New York Times. She appears fairly frequently on Chris Hayes' show. I have agreed with her sometimes. I've not agreed with her a number of times. There's also McKay Coppins, who I don't think I'll be playing the audio from in this clip. But I did want to play what Michelle Goldberg had to say after this, because I think there's well, anyway, I don't want to give anything away. Here is a sizable portion. Again, it's about 10 minutes or so, maybe a bit less, of Chris Hayes last night. Listen to this.
Dangerous it feels in terms of the rhetoric. It's not going to work. And so because it's not going to work, they have to make the case in worse terms. Here's someone on the president's legal team calling for the execution of Chris Krebs, the former head of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency.
Anybody who thinks that this election went well, like that idiot Krebs, who used to be the head of...
Oh, yeah, the guy that was on 60 Minutes last night.
That guy is a Class A moron. He should be drawn and quartered, taken out at dawn and shot.
Taken out at dawn and shot. Really hard to overstate how dangerous that kind of thing is. It's completely unacceptable to say, totally responsible to air on television. But that is what Newsmax TV is going to bring to American discourse. Geneva now, of course, amid the outrage and lawsuit threats, is claiming he was just joking. My remarks were sarcastic and made in jest. It's pretty hard to take him at his word, but what do you think people thought when they heard that? You think everyone got the sarcasm and the jest? And then there are the conspiracy theories about election results going viral, leading to a young IT worker in Georgia getting death threats. Just a random worker who just happens to work in the IT department. There are some conservatives who I think have bad politics, by and large, that I don't agree with, whose vision of the world I don't agree with, but are willing to stand on the basic side of truth and democracy here. I mean, they're choosing the right side. One of them today, the voting implementation manager in Georgia, conservative Republican named Gabriel Sterling, came out to unload.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabriel Sterling. I'm the Voting System Implementation Manager for the state of Georgia. And just to give you all a heads up, this is going to be sort of a two-part press conference today. And at the beginning of this, I'm going to do my best to keep it together, because it has all gone too far. All of it. Joe DeGeneva today asked for Chris Krebs, a patriot who ran CISA, to be shot. A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason because he was transferring a report on batches from an EMS to a county computer so he could read it. It has to stop. Mr. President, you have not condemned these actions or this language. Senators, you have not condemned this language or these actions. This has to stop. We need you to step up, and if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some. My boss, Secretary Raffensperger, his address is out there. They have people doing caravans around their house. They've had people come onto their property. Trisha, his wife of 40 years, is getting sexualized threats through her cell phone. It has to stop. This is elections. This is the backbone of democracy. And all of you who have not said a damn word are complicit in this. It's too much. Yes, fight for every legal vote. Go through your due process. We encourage you, use your First Amendment. That's fine. Death threats, physical threats, intimidation. It's too much. It's not right. They've lost the moral high ground to claim that it is. I don't have all the best words to do this because I'm angry. And the straw that broke the camel's back today is, again, this 20-year-old contractor for a voting system company just trying to do his job. Just there. In fact, I talked to Dominion today and they said he's one of the better ones they got. His family's getting harassed now. There's a noose out there with his name on it. It's not right. I've got police protection outside my house. Fine. You know, I took a higher profile job. I get it. Secretary ran for office. His wife knew that too. This kid took a job. He just took a job. And it's just wrong. I can't begin to explain the level of anger I have right now over this. And every American, every Georgian, Republican and Democrat alike should have that same level of anger. Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed. And it's not right. It's not right. And y'all, I don't have anything scripted. This is, like I said, I'm going to do my best to keep it together. All of this is wrong. DeGeneva, who said for Chris Krebs to get shot, is a former U.S. attorney. He knows better. The people around the president know better. Mr. President, as the secretary said yesterday, people aren't giving you the best advice on what's actually going on the ground. It's time to look forward. If you want to run for re-election in 4 years, fine, do it. But everything we're seeing right now, there's not a path. Be the bigger man here and step in, tell your supporters, don't be violent, don't intimidate. All that's wrong. It's un-American.
It's pretty remarkable to see that. I have a lot of complicated feelings about it, but remarkable nonetheless. He chose which side he was on. Good for him. And this is the simple test most of the Republican Party is failing today. A cynical calculation that it is in their best political interest and that they're scared of their own people, while most of the Republican caucus continues to say absolutely nothing. We know which side they're on. With me now, Michelle Goldberg, op-ed columnist, New York Times, McKay Coppin, staffer of The Atlantic, who both extensively covered the effects of Trumpism in America. Michelle, I was really struck by that today. For a lot of reasons. What was your reaction to it?
You know, I think that on the one hand, we've seen a lot of these state officials behave with a lot of honor and professionalism. And to the extent that this election didn't go completely off the rails, as a lot of people predicted in the run-up, it's because of the honor and professionalism of Republican state officials in general, including Republican state officials. At the same time, you know, what Donald Trump is doing is not new. You might say that there's something, particularly autocratic, particularly frightening about the way that he is contesting the results of the election. But to see a Republican suddenly so furious at Donald Trump, suddenly so aghast at the way that Donald Trump spreads conspiracy theories and incites violence against, both officials and also more obscure Americans. On the one hand, it's welcome. On the other hand, it's like that he's just waking up to it because it's happening to him. Yeah. Because none of this is new. It's just, there's an element of now suddenly it's directed at Republicans.
Here is what I want you to consider, dear listener. that all of these acts of violence, all of Trump's history with it, are connected to a system. It's all well and good for Chris Hayes and his guests, Michelle Goldberg, who I normally disagree with, but actually I thought made some good points, and McKay Coppins, to speak about these issues. But you've got to have context. There must be historical context to all of this. This is the reality. You cannot just report the story of Gabriel Sterling getting upset. Where has he been for 4 years? Where has he been for 44 years? Donald Trump has been inciting violence forever. This isn't just even about Donald Trump. This is about a system of violence, an institutionalized system of violence. And I really wish, although I think the discussion that Chris Hayes had on Tuesday, December 1st, 2020, was a good discussion. It had to go and must go and should have gone further than it did. The historical context is so important. Joseph DeGeneva is obviously an extraordinarily dangerous human being and despicable, as is Donald Trump, as are all of these Republicans who say nothing, and they are absolutely accomplices. They're not enablers. They are accomplices. It would have been wise for Chris Hayes to talk about the historic context. Violent rhetoric and actual acts of violence against politicians, against black people, against women of all races, has been a staple of this country from the inception of it, at least as it was called the United States of America. This goes beyond Gabriel Sterling getting upset. He is no hero. Now, I'm glad he opened his mouth finally and said something. And maybe Michelle Goldberg has a point about, yeah, it's only when it's hitting him and hitting the Republican Party that a Republican says something. But Republicans are the accomplices of this. And this is even bigger than them. It's about a system that absolutely is violent. A state system that exacts violence against black people, that has a death penalty, that kills people in the name of the state, that has a military-industrial complex. Come on now. Let's get real. It's easy to have a surface discussion, and I do understand that cable news television has segments and advertising, and you have to condense a discussion. I get it. But if need be, carry the discussion into 2 segments, into 2 blocks. Have a continuing discussion. You can't just use this as a 10-minute story. This is about a system in the country that endorses, champions, and exhibits its very own violent strictures. And instead of just shining a light on the already shiny object, can you mention the long history of political violence in this country, threats and otherwise? Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, assassination attempts of Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, the killing of Mayor George Moscone in San Francisco, the San Francisco mayor, the killing of Harvey Milk, one of the supervisors on the board of supervisors here in San Francisco, the attempted assassination more recently of now, but then, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords in Tucson, Arizona. Come on, people. Come on. That's the context. That is the context. And my goodness me, you have an audience and you blow an opportunity like this to have a discussion like this, and you fail to look at all of the other things and look at Trump's history, his rallies in 2015 and 16, where he was encouraging people and he openly said, knock the crap out of them, I'll pay your legal fees. He was speaking to police cadets while in the White House, but on the road. But you know what I mean. I don't want to call him that word because he doesn't deserve the word. The only real person who's going to become president is Joe Biden, coming in 49 days. Donald Trump occupied the office and he made a speech to police cadets, a graduating class, telling them don't be too nice. Rough up that suspect you've arrested. Bang the person's head on the car. And you know what happened? George Floyd happened 2 years after that. Damn, this is what frustrates me, you know? Dear listener, this is what frustrates me, is that there is, and I've talked about this before, no context, none. You have a golden opportunity to educate your viewer, to educate your viewers, and give them this context beyond what you're seeing. Look at the history of the country. Look at this long line of threats of violence and actual violence against politicians, particularly black politicians, particularly women who are politicians of any racial group. And you didn't bring up the kidnapping plot against the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer? You didn't bring up the threats to kill her? That those white men who were arrested, who threatened to murder her, who wanted to assassinate her, you forget about these white men and some white women who stormed the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan on a number of occasions earlier this year. Have you forgotten? And you saw fit not to include that in your conversation. These white men threatening the life of Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, in the state capitol with open carry, their firearms loaded. They go into the legislative body and they stand on the balcony with their guns as business is being conducted. And two of the people standing on that balcony were part of the plot to kill Governor Whitmer. And you don't mention that on your show. Chris doesn't mention that. This is all one big thing. These are not things that you disaggregate. You just don't. This violent system, so many acts done at the behest of Donald Trump, or what I call stochastic violence. Stochastic violence, stochastic terrorism. And I discussed this a number of weeks, maybe a couple of months back now, with Manju Kulkarni. And I mentioned that word, stochastic terrorism. And stochastic terrorism means a repeated demonization in public of particular people that, while you cannot specifically tie those repeated demonizations directly to proving that those demonizations were the cause, you can certainly say that someone acting in response to you is doing something based on how they receive what you have said. That there is a probability that your words fueled, inspired, galvanized, weaponized, infused, compelled a response of violence or terrorist violence in some individuals. There are 54 acts, at least 54 acts of violence in this country, and some beyond this country, like Christchurch in March of 2019, like Quebec City a few years ago, where someone had killed 6 people at a mosque, and of course in Christchurch, New Zealand, a white man who wrote a manifesto praising Trump and said that Trump inspired him, killed 50 people, Muslims, praying in 2 different mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. The Tree of Life murders at the synagogue there in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, PA, in 2018. The pipe bombs being sent that same year by a Trump supporter. I want you to listen to this next report. This one is from Kira Phillips of ABC News Prime. You want to listen to this. Please listen to this.
President gets ready to hold this rally in Tulsa. Safety is a concern, but his words will also be under scrutiny as he speaks to his most diehard supporters in the midst of a pandemic and after weeks of racial unrest. The president's critics have long accused him of using language that drives division, insisting his rhetoric even stokes violence. But we wanted to take a closer look at that issue. Is there any real documented evidence linking the president's words to acts or threats of violence? ABC's Kira Phillips has that story.
In the past 2 weeks, tens of thousands of peaceful protesters have made their voices heard, galvanized by the police killing of another unarmed black man. And for many of those protesters, another man was also on their mind, President Donald Trump. Their signs branding him a divider, even a threat to America.
Are you concerned that you might be stoking more racial violence or more racial discord?
It's a question he's faced for years, accused of fanning the fires of hatred.
When you bash immigrants, when you bash refugees, when you say we want to put up a wall, when you say we want to ban all Muslims, it's not responsible for it, but it does cause this cauldron.
President Trump disagrees.
I think my rhetoric is it brings people together.
But does it? The president and his words appearing in scores of police reports and courtrooms. After these two brothers beat a sleeping homeless man in Boston, one of them telling police, Donald Trump was right. All these illegals need to be deported. The victim was in the country legally. And this Cleveland man attacked his African-American neighbors with a knife and then tells police Donald Trump will fix them because they are scared of Donald Trump. And watch this video from Gainesville, Florida. A Latino man is working outside of his convenience store when he says a stranger suddenly bashes him in the head. Moments later, the victim describing the attack.
Hit me in my back of my head, bro. I said, this is for Trump.
After reviewing hundreds of police reports and court records from across the country, ABC News found more than 50 criminal cases where Donald Trump was explicitly invoked in relation to violent acts, threats, or alleged assaults.
The suspect yelled the word Trump as he hit the East African man.
Officials say that he followed her yelling Donald Trump when she tried to get away. He threatened to kill 2 members of Congress. He says he made the calls because he was upset about the impeachment proceedings against President Trump.
ABC News searched for past cases similarly invoking Presidents Bush or Obama, but could not find one.
In order for something to be stated in a charging document, a criminal complaint, an indictment, or some other type of court record, there has to be substantive, concrete information that supports the information or the assertion provided in that court document.
Like from this incident at a gas station in Bellevue, Washington, when police say 56-year-old Kenneth Sharpie drove his truck toward 2 brothers, threatening to kill them for being Muslim. He then tries to explain his actions to a police officer.
I said, please get out of my country because I don't like him here. And this is why I like Trump. And he's doing the same thing as I feel, wants him out of our country.
Build that wall. Build that wall.
This man was arrested after threatening to massacre employees of the Boston Globe for their coverage of Trump. In more than a dozen calls to the newspaper, he declares, "You are the enemy of the people."
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
In 10 of the cases identified by ABC News, defense attorneys specifically cited Trump in court to help explain their clients' violent or threatening actions.
We begin tonight with the latest on that fast-moving investigation into a Florida man federal officials now say mailed 14 bombs targeting President Trump's highest-profile critics.
After Cesar Sayoc pleaded guilty to 65 federal charges, his lawyer tells the judge, "We believe the president's rhetoric contributed to Mr. Sayoc's behavior."
It is disconcerting to law enforcement that there are people out there, mentally unwell, violence-prone individuals in our society who will hear the words of the President of the United States and view those words as permission to go out and conduct an attack against others.
However, Trump's critics have also invoked his name during acts of violence.
Say to Trump.
In this gruesome case, 4 young African Americans in Chicago tied up a white, mentally disabled man and assaulted him, forcing him to recite racist and anti-Trump phrases, broadcasting it all online.
The country is very angry and polarized, and people tend to view those who disagree with them as the enemy or as the opposition.
But of the 54 total cases, ABC News found that 75% of them reflected someone echoing Trump's rhetoric, not protesting it.
I guess you're a Trump supporter, is that what it is? Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah.
Some of those charged were found to be mentally ill, others just dangerously devoted to their politics.
We must recognize that the internet has provided a dangerous avenue to radicalize, disturb minds, and perform demented acts.
The president may not be directly responsible for the acts of violence conducted by some of these individuals, but his words do provide them the validation.
Even before entering the White House, Trump recognized the power of a commander-in-chief's words.
The irresponsible rhetoric of our president, who has used the pulpit of the presidency to divide us by race and color, has made America a more dangerous environment than, frankly, I have ever seen.
Once in office, Trump insisted he deserves no such blame.
Do you think that you bear any responsibility for moderating your language when it comes to that?
No, I don't. I think my language is very nice.
These are examples. What you just heard in that report from Kira Phillips of ABC News Prime are examples of what I described: stochastic violence, stochastic terrorism. All of those things. stochastic, stochastic. These are things that the speaker knows could inspire violence in some people. While 90% of the people who hear those things may not act violently, there is a chance that someone in that 10% will. And that report exemplified it. I mean, what can be more even beyond this? When you hear someone say, knock the crap out of them, will you? Oh, come on. That is someone who is galvanizing violence. He is an accomplice. Donald Trump, that is. The Guardian did a story on 52 acts of violence, and I'm going to link to that story. I mean, there's so many done in the name of Donald Trump. So many. El Paso in 2019. That guy, that white man, wrote a manifesto praising Trump. I mean, so many people have done this. It's so obvious that Donald Trump is dangerous here. And I can play, and I will play you some more audio. The Republicans have become, over these last 50, 60 years, a violent group in so many different ways. The violence comes in so many different ways. This was a candidate for governor of Pennsylvania in 2018, a Republican. I mean, this is... I've got to tell you, if you don't find this to be disturbing, you won't find anything to be disturbing. This is Scott Wagner, a Republican candidate for governor of Pennsylvania in 2018, October 2018. Listen to this.
Because I'm going to stomp all over your face with golf spikes because I'm going to win this for the state of Pennsylvania and we're throwing you out of office.
I'm going to spike you? I mean, this is... I mean, come on. And the thing is, another discussion, again, a discussion has to happen that's longer than the 10. And that's quite a big block of time. that Chris Hayes devoted to this. And I'm not necessarily attacking Chris Hayes at all. I am talking about the news people, the producers of that show, All In, who I think have a responsibility. I mean, Chris does as well, but we are dealing with a fascist dictator type. We are dealing with the Nazis, the brown shirts in America, and that conversation's not being had. As far as I'm concerned, it is very important to raise the critical questions and have these conversations. It really is not enough to sit and just talk about Gabriel Sterling and about Joseph DeGeneva. You have to talk about a system that is violent. You have to talk about all of this in the context of a war machine. Governments waging war. It does run that deep. And trust me, these things are connected. How can you not look at Lockheed Martin and all of these contractors, defense contractors? How can you not look at drone strikes? How can you not look at that and school shootings? And you can't tie those things together in a culture and an atmosphere of violence. A United States founded on violence. Native Americans being genocided. Black people being enslaved and murdered and lynched and assassinated. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. You can't link all this together? Isn't it obvious? You cannot divorce these things from each other. You cannot. Oh, you cannot. For if you do, you would be but a fool. Nothing but a fool. Christopher Hassan, lieutenant in the Coast Guard of the United States of America, threatening to kill politicians, had a long list of media people, including Chris Hayes, that he wanted to kill. He wanted to kill Democratic politicians. He had spreadsheets and he had 300, 400 firearms. And he was arrested in February of 2019, thank God. Guy he's a racist, a so-called nationalist like Donald Trump is. He's inspired by Trump. This guy wanted to murder people on a mass level. He wanted to kill black people. He wanted to get rid of all kinds of people. And you know what he was arrested for and what he pled guilty to? Drug possession, firearm possession. Not the threats to politicians, not the threats to black people, not the threats to Supreme Court judges, not the threats to any of that. None of the violent stuff that he threatened. Threatening to kill people if they impeached Donald Trump. You tell me that's not someone who's a fan of Donald Trump. And this guy was charged for firearm possession and drug possession. Not for the threats, not for any of that, death threat. No. He was convicted on that. Not on the death threats, but on the gun possession and the drug possession. Are you kidding me? 13-year prison sentence he got this year. And by the way, do you know that one of the judges, the magistrate, wanted to release this guy? And that decision got appealed to a higher court. I think it was the district court. And they said, hell no. You're not releasing this guy. This guy's a flight risk. He's too dangerous. And only that stopped him from being able to roam free? You've got to look at this in the context of a violent system. The same system that enables Donald Trump to allow over 271,000 people in America to die from coronavirus. You cannot divorce these things. This is a very, very dangerous time in this country. And I trust that people who need to be protected, who are in government, in politics, are being protected by the requisite Secret Service or any physical protection they need. Because this here now is extremely dangerous. And the Republicans are silent, pretty much, except for people like Gabriel Sterling. Nobody's tamping down on this rhetoric that's violent. I mean, how can you have the conversation that I played you a part of with Gabriel Sterling and him talking about, and not talk about Kenosha, not talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, and not talk about over $2 million being raised for him? And he murdered people on camera and said so after he did it. He killed 2 people, blew the arm off another. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you? Jacob Blake, do you understand? Shot 8-9 times in his back, paralyzed now for the rest of his days. If we are going to be really serious, not only about discussing this, but doing something about all of this kind of violence, all of this, then we had better start to discuss the history and the context, and also look at a violent system and a country that perpetuates violence. It has been part of the United States discourse for well over 240 years, and certainly beyond that. We need to stop playing and get real and be for real. We really need to. Because I do not know if people truly understand just how dangerous all of this is. We've had Nazis in this country, not just in 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia. We've had them here since before the 1930s. We had them here in the United States in 1939. In New York City, no less. At Madison Square Garden. Marshall Curry directed a short documentary film about this called A Night at the Garden. In 1939, Nazis filled the 20,000 plus seats at Madison Square Garden in full Nazi uniform. I don't care that they were American Nazis or not. Nazis are not good people, Donald Trump, and they are not very fine people. They are dangerous, they are evil, and they really should be prosecuted when they do violent things. We really must get real and stop kidding ourselves that this is about 1 or 2 people. This is about a whole lot more. This is about the entire society and how violent it is, how violent its systems are. You've got 5-hour wait lines all over the country. People waiting for food. Do you know how violent that is? You've got the richest country on the planet You've got people on Twitter making death threats against people. Come on, folks. It's about time that the corporate news media in particular stepped to the plate and actually gave an historical overview of all of this and stop pretending that this is about one incident here or there. This is about a whole system that is complicit and also an accomplice and definitely bears the brunt of the scorn and the attacks. There is no question about it. None whatsoever. Don't forget that you can now listen to the Politicrat podcast on Audible at audible.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe now. And thank you for your support.
Court documents providing chilling details about a Coast Guard lieutenant who prosecutors say hoped to murder innocent civilians on a scale rarely seen in this country before being arrested in Maryland last week. 49-year-old Christopher Hassan is facing federal charges of illegal possession of a firearm and possession of a controlled substance. But prosecutors say these charges are just the tip of the iceberg, writing, "The defendant is a domestic terrorist bent on committing acts dangerous to human life that are intended to affect government conduct." Investigators say they found this hit list on Hassan's computer, containing names of prominent Democrats, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as well as a number of 2020 Democratic candidates, including Senators Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand. The list also containing the names of several journalists from CNN and MSNBC. Federal agents say they found 15 firearms and more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition in Hassan's Maryland apartment, in addition to a stockpile of steroids the government says Hassan was using to increase his ability to conduct attacks. In emails outlined in court filings, Hassan calls himself a white nationalist and was inspired by a manifesto written by Anders Breivik, a Norwegian terrorist convicted of killing 77 people in 2011. Prosecutors say roughly a month before his arrest, Hassan Googled topics including, "Are Supreme Court justices protected? Where do most senators live in D.C.? And civil war if Trump impeached."
Actually, we've seen time and again, we've seen people that are unhinged, who aren't working on government computers, people that listen to and believe conspiracy theories that are fanned by the president and his supporters. And you take, whether you talk about Pizzagate, whether you talk about the madness that is spread around on the internet, and then you have the president of the United States, instead of tamping down these conspiracy theories, actually stirring them up.
Or stirring up his
using
own.
Stalinist phrases like enemies of the people that only tyrants have used in the past. No American president has ever used it. And as I've been saying for well over a year now, it's a phrase that actually the Soviet Union outlawed after the death of Joseph Stalin, because it was used to destroy human beings. So you have a president who churns up the conspiracy theories, who churns up hatred of the press, who spits out phrases like enemies of the people, and he sits there and, again, something like this happens, not a word, not a single word on Twitter, not a response to yesterday morning's warning from the New York Times. And that's what, again, the timing of all this is just so obvious. We should be shocked that we are not more shocked that the publisher of the New York Times tells the president of the United States, you know, you keep calling the press enemies of the people, and you're going to get somebody hurt, you're going to get somebody killed. He writes that in the morning, and in the afternoon, we have this conspiracy to actually kill top Democratic lawmakers who oppose Donald Trump, and journalists who dare to report the truth about Donald Trump.
Nothing from the president.
This is pretty simple, and it's all on the president's shoulders. It's all the president's fault. And he sits there with his mouth shut for once in his life, doesn't say anything, doesn't tweet anything, which, of course, makes it even more on him.
All of these violent acts, the audio that you've heard here, I mean, this all needs to be put together and analyzed and discussed. Because when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn in 49 days from now, there is going to be more of this rhetoric and this violent, threatening behavior. And it's important to remember that this has happened in history before and happened in Germany as well, in particular in the Soviet Union as well. This is a very grave situation, and I think that there needs to be maximum protections, but there also needs to be education. And there is something, education that is, that has been long been put out to pasture by Republicans and conservatives in this country. Opportunities to educate the viewing public while you have their rapt attention are going begging. And these opportunities should never go begging, especially when the so-called democracy that you claim to have is at stake. We cannot afford to roll back toward this era again. Yet this era has been here, and somehow it has never left. Just ask black people who are regularly murdered by the state, be it at the hands of the death penalty or by some white, racist, terroristic killing mob, or by police. If we do not learn from our history, talk about our history, address our history, and do things to compensate in some way those who are oppressed, if we don't start talking about reparations and doing something, if we continue to pretend that the war machine is not connected to a lot of this stuff and that this violent rhetoric comes from somewhere and it's not just some idle rantings of some people, we are doomed. What must be understood here, is that there is a system undergirding all of this. You have to remember that there was a duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr back in the day. And in the duel between them, Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton, who I believe at some point was the Treasury Secretary? I forget what his post was now. Shame on me. I saw the musical Hamilton, and I also know a bit about American history. I should know what his post was. But the point is that none of the things that Chris Hayes and co. spoke about happen in a vacuum. Especially when you have what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, the danger of that whole thing driving people to do what they do. And people listening might think that this is a stretch, but I don't think this is a stretch. You have to examine the whole environment. You have to examine the whole environment. There is no way that you can disaggregate these things. The school shootings, the violent rhetoric, Donald Trump putting an ad out for the young boys, the innocent young boys, the exonerated 5, the execution of an innocent black man in Alabama at the hands of the state and the governor, Kay Ivey, earlier this year. The brother's name was Nathaniel Woods. You can't disaggregate any of this. You can't disaggregate this. You cannot. You cannot do this. You have to look at this in context. Cindy Hyde Smith in Mississippi in 2018, saying that she'd love to have a front row seat at a lynching. Running against a black man saying that, Mike Espy, who, by the way, has lost now to her twice in Mississippi, this year and 2 years ago in 2018. Donald Trump saying things about Cory Booker. Oh, he's going to terrorize your suburbs. And 2 years ago, this pipe bomb freak, Cesar Sayoc, sent pipe bombs to Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who is now going to be the vice president. I mean, do you not understand that this stuff is all part of the same thing? This is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. This stuff about the enemy of the people and all, and then you see in Annapolis, Maryland, 5 people or 6 people are killed at the Capitol Gazette in the newsroom. I mean, Donald Trump saying all this, I mean, that's a real example of stochastic terrorism there. That's yet another example of it. 5 or 6 people dead in a newsroom after Donald Trump had been for the better part of 2 years talking about the enemy of the people. The media is the enemy of the people. And then 5 or 6 people end up being murdered in a newsroom in Annapolis, Maryland. The Capitol Gazette. And Gabriel Sterling only just spoke out on December 1st. Where has he been? Where on earth has he been? Where has anybody been? Except the people who have spoken. Well, at least Gabriel Sterling said something. At least as a conservative Republican, he opened his mouth anyhow. Not that he should be getting a medal for any of that. I won't be putting or pinning a medal on him. But at least he spoke. The rest are complicit. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.